Claudia Jeltsch, because Claudia is half Finnish, half German, and she's going to talk about German and Austrian foodways, and after the results of her research, fascinating research about the double belonging thing, German and Finnish. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha, for inviting me. And yeah, I don't know if you know the German national food. What is it? It's Döner Kebab. Yeah, that's a joke from Germany. Okay, so to start with, but I took along here a quote from my research, and one of the persons I've interviewed mentioned as German food sauerkraut, Eisbein and mashed potatoes. But she was the only one who mentioned sauerkraut, and the only one who mentioned Eisbein, and the only one who mentioned mashed potatoes. So my task today is to tell you about German and Austrian cuisine. And well, what is my expertise? Probably you will hear from my speaking that I've grown up in Germany. So I have spent about 25 years of my life in Germany, but I have also lived 8 years in Austria. So I think I'm the right person to tell you about both cuisines. And as Sasha has mentioned, I will combine this with the research I do at the University of Helsinki. I write my PhD, and you will hear more about it a little bit later. But let's have a look at German and Austrian cuisine. So, German food, does it exist? Of course it exists, because Germans eat certain kinds of food. By the way, anyone here in the room who understands a little bit of German? Okay, or even some Germans present? Okay, no one wants to admit it? Okay, well, after today's elections, maybe, you know. Okay, so it's all a question of definition, of course, yeah? In research, you always have to define what you're talking about, and of course, German food exists, food that Germans eat. But if you're looking for this one single German food culture, you are not going to find it, because in Germany we only have regional specialities. That's the basic fact that I want you to take home. And why is it that way? Well, there are lots of reasons for it. Let's first look at the numbers. In Germany, when we look at the population, we have 79% Germans, 11% other Europeans, 7% Asians, and the biggest group there are Turks, 3.5%. You can see the other numbers here on the slide. 5.5% of the population are Muslims. That's approximately the same number as Swedish-speaking population in Finland. Think about it. And in Finland, because of 5.5%, everything is written in Swedish language. So the Germans don't get that idea. I don't think so. So Germany is, if you look at the numbers, it's the second most popular immigrant destination after the US. Even though the Germans didn't want to admit it until recently. So that's according to the OECD. So those are the facts, and then there are historical facts. So let's look at the historical facts. This used to be what is now Germany and surroundings. So that was what was called the Holy Roman Empire in 1648, and it really looks like a patchwork. You see, there was no unified Germany until 1871. 1871. So that's something that, well, for a lot of people it's not well known. Well, I know for your research you shouldn't use Wikipedia because it's not 100% maybe correct, but even if they have done lots of mistakes here, it's still a basic fact that around 1798 there have been about 300 different states on the area where you now find Germany. So even if 2 or 3 maybe they are not correct, then it's still a lot, yeah. So I have taken along books that you might want to have a look at, and they are all about regional cuisine. So, sorry, they're all in German. So, Deutsche Regionalküche von A bis Z. This is maybe the most interesting one. It's without pictures, but it has all sorts of different regional food. And the basic fact is when I look at it, I won't know a lot of these. You know, I don't know them because they're from a different part than where I'm from. So it happens to me all the time that when I talk with Germans, you know, they will mention some kind of food that I have never tasted, that I don't know of. So let's have a look at that. And then if you're more into pictures, then you can look at this one. And also, when you look at it, it's organized according to regions, because that's the only logical separation that you can make. It's according to what in German is called Bundesländer, so the federal states of Germany. So this is one, if you don't know German so much and you love to look at pictures. And then another book, and I was wondering why they gave this title to this. They said Die echte deutsche Küche, which means the real German kitchen or cuisine. So is there an unreal German kitchen? I wonder. But, you know, these are questions. Sometimes in research it's very good to ask questions. In fact, you have to have the right questions. So, in fact, what I did when I wrote 10 years ago, oh my God, I wrote a book for Finnish-speaking learners of German. Here, Saksa matkailijoille, it means German for travelers. And there, of course, if you want to write something for travelers, you have to write something about food. So I chose from each German federal state, maybe the most famous food that you can think of. And this is what I want to present to you. Of course, this is a very personal choice, so I could have taken something else, but I had to make a choice. One or two specialities from every federal state. So if you look at Thüringen, most famous one is probably Thüringer Rostbratwurst. It's a famous sausage variety, and the recipe is from 1613. So Germany is also famous for its different sausage varieties. People say it has most sausage varieties in the world. I don't know if it's right, but maybe it's close to the truth. So in Sachsen, and Sachsen eventually gave the Finnish name for Germany, because in Finnish it's Saksa. We have the Dresdner Stollen. It's a very heavy Christmas cake with lots of butter inside and white dusting sugar. It should symbolize little Jesus covered in white clothes, and it's baked several weeks before Christmas so that the flavor is able to develop. Then I wanted to mention that because lots of people don't know that we have a Sorbian minority in Germany, and their specialty is Sorbian beer soup. In fact, we have different sorts of beer soup. What else can you expect from Germany, right? So they used to use beer for a lot of different recipes, and so their beer soup is also famous. Then one product from Sachsen-Anhalt is the Rotkäppchen sparkling wine. And this is one of the very few former Eastern German products that became market leaders in the unified Germany. So it's produced from wine that is made in the northernmost wine region of Europe. Commercial wine region of Europe, one has to say. There are a few vineyards also in some northern places, but commercially really successful. And so there haven't been so many products from the former GDR that have become really commercially successful, but this is maybe the one that has become most successful. Then let's go to the capital city, Berlin. There we have a certain kind of beer that's called Berliner Weisse mit Schuss. It means you put some syrup inside. There are two varieties. Either you put raspberry syrup inside, so that makes a red color, but the more exotic one is if you use sweet woodruff syrup. I know you won't know that word. In German it's Waldmeister syrup. Maybe this is the Latin name so that you're able to find it. In Finland, by the way, this is forbidden because if you take an overdose of this, you might get some liver damage, and the Finns, you know, they're very, very conscious about these things. So, but you have to drink liters and liters, yeah. So it's a plant that grows in the forest, yeah, and gives that nice green color. So if you ever go to Berlin, this is the thing to taste. And around Berlin, the region is then Brandenburg, and from there we have some famous Spreewälder Dillgurken, pickled gherkins with dill and vinegar. And if you don't know them, then one German movie that I would recommend you to watch is Goodbye Lenin, if you haven't seen it yet. There these gherkins play quite a little role. And nowadays they're really famous, and people love them. You can, for instance, you can buy them at the Berlin airport. Yeah, so people will buy gherkins before flying to some places. In Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, that's the region in the east, but at the Baltic Sea, we have sea buckthorn growing. So sea buckthorn liquor is very popular, but of course maybe also some fish specialities from there. So if we move on, Schleswig-Holstein, now we go to the western or former western part of Germany. The Lübecker marzipan, it's a marzipan from Lübeck, is very famous. And the reason for it is it contains more almonds than all other marzipans. So it's regulated by law. It has to have less sugar and more almond, and almond is what makes it precious, and it's also much more expensive than sugar. And when you visit the Marzipan Museum in Lübeck, you will see the order papers from the Russian Tsar's wives, because they ordered this kind of marzipan for themselves. Lots of the wives of the Russian Tsars were in fact by origin German princesses, so they loved to have the same stuff that they were used to when they were small. In Hamburg, eel soup is a very traditional food. In fact, everything that comes from the sea. Smoked eel also, there's a famous fish market where you can buy all sorts of fish food. And also another so-called Stadtstaat, which means like one city makes up a federal state, is Bremen, in fact the smallest one of all. And there it's lapskaus, lobscouse, in fact the word comes from Norwegian, I found out. Is quite famous. It's a mixture of beef, meat, fish, potato, onions and cucumbers. It doesn't look nice, yeah, so if you look at it, it's maybe even disgusting, but the taste is something different. Then in Niedersachsen we have a very famous cheese variety, Harzer Käse. It's an almost fat-free cheese, and it's one of those things, either you love it or hate it. There's nothing in between, so maybe you want to try it one day. And then in basically all the German regions we have different varieties of marinated beef, and it's called Sauerbraten. So from Nordrhein-Westfalen, which happens to be the federal state where I come from, they have this variety. It means you have to marinate it in a special kind of sauce before it is prepared, made of vinegar and then some different ingredients, and they might be different ones from one village to the other. It's different. Hessen then. Hessen is the place where you find Frankfurt, the European Bank. You find grüne Soße. It's green sauce made from 7 different herbs. So you might want to try that one. Germany is also famous for its wine. So it's not only a beer country. So maybe the most famous wine region is Rheingau or Mittelrhein. And there the most famous wine variety is Riesling. So that's maybe something that you want to try in this region. Saarland is a small state next to the French border, and they have lots of apple trees, and that's why they produce lots of apple wine. And traditionally it's served here not in a glass but in something that you can see on this picture. Unfortunately it's quite small here on the picture, but in fact I could provide you those documents via Moodle. I think it's possible, so that you don't have to, that you can have a look at them much better. From Baden-Württemberg, something famous along Schwäbische Maultaschen. They are in fact similar to Italian ravioli. And they are often served with fried onions or in a soup. Bavaria, in fact, so famous that I had to take 2 items along. It's also the state with the biggest surface in Germany. Weißwurst mit Brezel. It's a sausage made from veal meat and pretzel along. And the tradition says that this sausage should be eaten on the day it is produced before noon. So it's like a fresh food, fresh meat food. Of course it's cooked, but it has to be fresh. And another famous item, food item from Bavaria, in fact here I have the German expressions, but in English this is Bavaria, is Leberkäse, sometimes Leberkäse, usually served with beer. It's a type of meatloaf. And contrary to the name, it doesn't contain liver and nor cheese, even though the name refers to the 2 items. So, which is funny, people love to eat it for, like, not as a real meal, but as a snack in between. Lots of fat. So usually lots of items in the German cuisine have got lots of fat. Okay, something to remember also is German bread culture. So Germans would usually go to a bakery to buy their bread, not to the supermarket, because they want fresh bread, they want fresh buns. So they wouldn't accept this way, like it is done here in Finland, that you go to the supermarket and buy your bread there. But there used to be bakeries basically at every corner of the street. Now their number has diminished, but still there are quite lots of them still in existence. Also butchers, in fact. Lots of Germans still buy their meat from the local butcher and they don't go to the supermarket for that. Then let's not forget German cakes and tarts. So Germans go to special places called Konditoreien. So it's a place where you buy your cakes and tarts, and you can also go there and just have a coffee, and it's basically something like Fatsa, but you find it in a city with the same size than Helsinki. You would find probably at least 20 different places like Fatsa. And well, we have already mentioned there is beer Germany and then there's wine Germany, so both do exist. In fact, Germany has quite a high consumption of beer. If I remember right, only the Czech Republic has got a bigger consumption of beer when it comes a liter per person. But they drink it on a regular basis. That means for the evening they have their glass of beer each evening, and they wouldn't get drunk, you know. Not like you probably can see it here on Saturday evenings at the railway station. Not so much, of course, we also have that problem, but just in comparison. And when we look at the beer, in Germany something exists, it's called Reinheitsgebot, it translates to purity law, and it's from 1516 when a Bavarian king, I think it was, he appointed this law, and he said you're not allowed to use anything else than water, malt and hops for making beer. Of course, in those days people didn't know that you needed also yeast. Yeast came automatically from the air, But this way he wanted to prevent beer brewers from using some toxic ingredients, which also at the time sometimes were used, and to dilute the beer with water afterwards. A lot of Germans talk about that this is the first law regulating food safety. That's not true, in fact. We have had, far back in the history, also the old Romans already had some laws regarding food safety. But it is, well, so to say, one of the laws that has survived the longest time. And Germany only had to give up this law when it was part of the EU, and some beer producing countries like Belgium, they said we are not allowed to have our beers on the German market, because you know some beers in Belgium are produced of, they use cherries or raspberries, and these beers were not allowed to enter the German market. So the beer producers in Belgium, they were not happy with the situation. And since inside the EU you have a free movement of goods, this had to be changed. So the German beer brewers, they solved the problem this way, that if they wanted to continue to produce the beer according to the German Reinheitsgebot, they put a certain label on their beer which says brewed according to German old purity law. So people know then, if they have this beer, okay, if they want this beer, I can still have it, but then also you can buy in Germany some Belgian beers produced with some other ingredients. And on top of that, it means that there are no preservatives in this beer that is produced according to the purity law. And you will find a date on the beer. And usually the date is like maybe in a year's time or so. So you cannot store the beer for a long time. But this is a quality sign, so to speak. So if you want to have this kind of beer, you're still able to get it. So what do I mean by Ostalgia? Well, you know that Germany used to be divided. And Ostalgia refers to the former, in German, DDR, GDR, the German, the East German state that existed until the reunification. And people now ask for the old products that used to be produced when Eastern Germany still existed. So it's a kind of fashion, or maybe it's also in connection that people, when they become older, they want to have the same products back that they used to have as children. But there is a sort of revival of these old products. It's a small niche. It's not everyone, but some people are looking for the old products they used to have in the old days when the GDR still existed. So now we move to Austria, okay? So I'm really happy that I have a little bit more time, because alone with Germany I could have filled the time. It's not a problem. So Austrian food. First of all, Austrian cuisine doesn't equal Viennese cuisine. In fact, what you find in many places, it's going to be Wiener Küche in German, which is Viennese cuisine. There are small differences between the two of them. So, of course, in Austrian cuisine you have different regional varieties, almost in the same way as in Germany. But Viennese cuisine then has got influences from all parts of the former Habsburg Empire. I will soon show you a map where you are able to see that. Austria used to be a lot bigger than it is today. You will see just in a moment. And one of the most important parts of Viennese cuisine is also the Viennese coffee house culture, because we have to remember Vienna is very proud to be the first city in Europe that started to drink coffee. They have their own their story about it, because the Turks came and they were in front of Vienna, and when they left they left a few buckets of coffee beans there, and that's how it is told. If that's the real story or if it's a legend, I'm not able to tell you, but at least you'll hear that story in Vienna. You know, every tour guide in Vienna will tell you that story. So when the Turks left, then they took the coffee beans and then they produced the first coffee. And the first coffee addicts also, they love to drink coffee, and there's still this coffee house tradition very alive in Vienna, and they're very proud of that. And another really important thing to remember is that when Austria joined the European Union in 1995, they made some arrangements that they could keep their own different food vocabulary. So they hated the thought that the Germans would force them to use German words for their foodstuff, because Austria has got different words. I will show you in a minute. So now there is an agreement which says Austrian members of the European Parliament are allowed to use their vocabulary, and it won't be changed to German words. Like, let's take potatoes, okay? Potatoes in German are Kartoffeln, and in Austria they are Erdäpfel, which translates to earth apples. So if an Austrian member of the European Parliament wants to write a text where potatoes are mentioned, okay, Erdäpfel is going to be there and no one is going to change it to Kartoffel. Yeah, it was very important for them, and they have a list where all the items are mentioned that they are still able to use. So it's kind of fixed in EU legislation. I will show you different items where you can see that. So now let's have a look at Austria here, and this is what you nowadays know as Austria. This is this little part, that's nowadays Austria, and this is what Austria used to be when it was Austria-Hungary. So now when you look at it, parts of Italy, here, northern parts of Italy, Czech Republic, well, in those days it used to be Czechoslovakia, but you know. Then parts of Poland. So in fact, what you have heard about Polish cuisine, you know, the little bit of inference is also there. Then we have basically the whole of Hungary. Then parts of Romania. We have Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia. Here Herzegovina, Bosnia, so it all used to be Austria, and this is one of the biggest trauma of Austria. You know, when you have lived there for 8 years, you'll find out that on the one hand they are happy with their history, that they are now, you know, independent, and they are neutral, just in the same way as Finland is. But then they have lost so much that you can hear it in some conversation once in a while, that they're kind of, you know, looking sometimes a little bit nostalgic about that they used to be much bigger. So what you see here, you can find in the vocabulary. So let's have a look at the vocabulary here. So this is Austrian German food items. This is German. In fact, here on this list I also have Swiss, which I won't cover this time because I haven't lived in Switzerland, and some English translations. And if you look at that, minced meat in German is Hackfleisch, in Austrian German it's Faschierte. That comes from French. When you look at cauliflower, they don't say Blumenkohl, they say Cafiol, it comes from Italian. Also eggplant comes from Italian. Then when you look at what they say for beans, comes from Latin. When you look at what they say for horseradish, it comes from Czech language. And when you look at what they say for corn, kukuruz, that's from Turkish language. So even Turkish language has left its trace here in Austrian German. And you could go on like that. You have traces here also from Romanian language, palacinken, and that goes back to the Latin placenta, and it's, pancake.
Which is the cake in Latin. It's not what you think it is. It's just a basic word for cake, like piraka. So
Thank you.
But also thanks to the shape, it has a quite a medical meaning.
For the medical meaning is then mother's cake, of course, for the little baby. But only from looking at this first page, you see that really the food has taken the name along and has traveled, and so people were moving to Vienna. You can see that also when you look at the phone directory of Vienna. You see all of those names from the different parts of the former empire. You see lots of different, and with food it's just the same. So this I can send Sasha, and she can put the whole. So I think on Moodle then. So you will have an overview of how German is different from Austrian German. One little addition here. The Austrian form is also very much used in Bavaria. So if you go to the southern parts of Germany, you'll find the same that they call whipped cream also Obers, and they also talk about Erdäpfel instead of Kartoffel. And so lots of these items are also used in southern Germany. Not all of them, but lots of them. So here's some typical Austrian foods that have been mentioned by the persons that I have interviewed. Kaiserschmarren with Zwetschgenröster. It's like a broken pancake, and there's also a story about it. There are lots of restaurants in Austria that claim that they have invented it. In fact, it's always the same story. The emperor came, because emperor in German is Kaiser, and there was a cook, and he wanted to make a pancake for the emperor, but it didn't succeed. It went into pieces, this thing, and then he had to present it as this is the speciality for the emperor. So I call it Kaiserschmarren. And Zwetschgenröster is this from plums with sugar. It's like a plum marmalade. It's something between marmalade and the fresh fruit. It's like a semi-marmalade.
And you can also call it
Povidel, Povidel. But in fact, Povidel is if you make it into very small pieces, like it's like mashed.
Okay.
Then it's more called Povidel. And Apfelstrudel, here a famous Austrian dish also. But now, how is this connected to my research? That's now the big question. Okay, so what have I done? I will tell you. I have interviewed altogether 31 persons, 19 women and 12 men, who all have one thing in common. They have one Finnish-speaking parent and one German-speaking parent. And I was interested in their linguistic identity, and I was especially interested in how they think about something in the German language that is called Heimat. Heimat, in fact, is an untranslatable word. You cannot translate it into Finnish, nor into English, nor into most of the languages that I know. In fact, I don't know any language that has exactly the same equivalent. It's this old dilemma: can you think about something without having the word? Or can you have a Finnish identity without knowing Finnish? That was also one of my research questions. So I had, wait, I have to go back. I had 14 persons where the German-speaking parent came from Germany, 1 person from the former Eastern Germany, 8 persons where the German-speaking parent came from Austria, and also 8 persons where the German-speaking parent came from Switzerland. And I was especially interested to include the 2 other German-speaking, bigger German-speaking countries, because Heimat also has got some history when we look back at the history of Germany. And for some people it has this a little bit bitter taste, because Hitler misused this word, yeah. So I wanted to know if also the ones who had lived in Austria, had received their schooling in Austria or in Switzerland, if they felt exactly in the same way as the Germans. And I wasn't interested in their passport, because these are very, rules. Austria, for instance, doesn't allow persons to have 2 nationalities usually, but Germany allows that, and Switzerland also. And I included persons who also didn't speak Finnish at all. So I had persons from all walks of life, and I interviewed them, and I had 8 questions. In fact, I used semi-structured interviews, and sorry, I cannot go into details here, but you just have to accept it in the way I'm going to present it here. So I used a method that is used in Finnish social psychology. It's called laadullinen asennetutkimus. The literal translation would be qualitative attitude research, which isn't a wonderful word for it, because it's more stance or stand-taking research. So at the moment when I asked them what kind of stand do these people take when it comes to these questions. And I had to include some elements of narrative semiotics. That means people talked about their life story, basically. When have they used which language? So how do the interviewers express their linguistic identity? Is linguistic knowledge linked to identity? And what do they think about Heimat? So now for the following, I will just show you the questions, and one of those questions is linked to food. But so that you get an overview about my questions, you can see here my questions, and I'm not going to read them aloud. And if anyone I have asked that. There are some who know German and some who know Finnish also. So some will profit from, because I have both Finnish answers and German answers. So here someone says I'm 2/3 Finnish and 1/3 German. That's a typical answer also. I'm both German and Finnish. And then someone answers here, I'm always an outsider, always. I'm an outsider in Finland and I'm an outsider in Germany, always. At no place I'm at home. And then of course I wanted to know about Heimat. Someone claims here it's at the moment and it's always going to be Finland. Then about Finnish identity, someone claims here, what has helped me to have a Finnish identity is that I know more or less perfectly the Finnish language. And I've spent my whole life here, except of some years of my studies and a few years of work. But also that I've always been together with Finnish women. So I've never had a German girlfriend. So I thought, yeah, that's an interesting explanation also. And then I wanted to know about the German-speaking part. And here someone says, I'm such a bastard. There's something Finnish and something German in good and in bad. And I'm such a pedant German, so my strongest trait is Ordnung muss sein, code switching, so there has to be order, German. So then I wanted to know if people claim to have several Heimaten, homelands. And here an interesting answer in Finnish. I would explain it that way, that I have a second homeland, and that is Germany, and Finland is like my first homeland. But I wouldn't say that in Finnish because Germany is my second homeland. There's not such a connotation with it. It just comes with the German language. And that's true. You can say that in German. It's a very common way to talk about your first homeland and your second homeland. But in Finnish, it's not very common to say it that way. But now, this is becoming interesting for you because this is the second last question. Which things that can be grasped with the senses do you link with the subject of homeland? This could be pictures, sounds, smells, tastes, things that you can touch. So now, when these people had to make, the decision, what reminds them of Heimat, what comes into their mind? So now let's look at those things. So here someone claims, Finland is pancakes, blueberries and fish. And then another one claims German things, sauerkraut, Eisbein and mashed potatoes. So this is what I quoted at the very start, but only once, mentioned only once in 31 cases. Bregenwurst, it's a northern German sausage that I had never heard of before this interview. I had to Google it. Yeah, so it's a typical example of how regional German cuisine is. Asparagus, Pils, a type of German beer, and kale, typical northern German items. And then they talk about a lot of Finnish items. They say like picking mushrooms on the meadow, searching for forest berries in the forest where one feels okay. Fragrances, yes, cinnamon in korvapuusti, they use code switching here. That reminds me a lot of Finland. And then also the taste of cinnamon. The normal Finn just vanishes behind a bush. For him, it's just normal to pick mushrooms. So, what is really funny here about, I have to say, I haven't analyzed all of the interviews, but almost all of them, a lot of them don't mention German items. And that's the funniest question here. I haven't found, a real explanation for that, but maybe that's something where you could have some input and give me some interesting explanation. So food, first of all, this is, I started the analysis, so food is the most mentioned item in this question. Of course, they mention also items, like they have haptic sensations they talk about. In Finland, you can go swimming naked. You cannot do that in Germany. So that's like something haptic. Of course, they talk also about sounds, but when we look at the whole amount of sensations they mention, then food is the most mentioned item. And in German, there is such a word as Essheimat. It means the place where there is my food of belonging. Yeah, so you can have a certain Essheimat. So I told you there were surprisingly many Finnish elements, and their specialness and Finnish character is stressed by the use of code switching. Of course, it's much easier simply to say pulla. If you have to say that in German, you need to say Finnisches Hefegepäck. Okay, how complicated is that? And then to make it even more complicated, Hefe doesn't exist in Austrian German. They have to use Germgebäck. So it's going to become complicated. And then the thing that I have mentioned already is some interviews don't mention German food items. These persons have lived their whole life in Germany. They don't even know how to write in Finnish language. And they only mention Finnish items. Why? Why? That's a nice, interesting question. So I have some sort of hypothesis why it could be that way. Maybe one of the reasons is when you look at Finnish items, there are some things that come immediately to your mind. But when you look at the same level German items, there are no common German items. If I compare, I just listened to the Polish presentation, you had 12 typical Polish Christmas dishes. Let's look at Christmas in Germany. You will have different Christmas dishes according to the region. There is not a single Christmas dish that you could say that is valid for the whole of Germany. So on the same level, when they think about Finnish items, German items, there are no items coming into their mind when they look at Germany. Maybe that's the reason. Or maybe it's the reason, well, I've mentioned this, that it's coming here later, Austrian and Swiss interviews usually also mention Austrian and Swiss food items. So especially the Swiss, they mention chocolate and cheese, not only Finnish items. So is it okay to be proud of Austrian Swiss culture but not of German culture? So is it this old thing that you shouldn't be proud? Because I have one guy mentioning here, it's especially German not to be proud of being German. So that's someone mentioning that. So does it also affect food, that you're not allowed to be proud of German food stuff? So, and then of course, I told you right at the start, we have lots of immigrants in Germany. So some other national food cultures are also mentioned, even as superior. Persian food is mentioned and Turkish food is mentioned. So when it comes to Finnish food items, they are presented as congruent to the country. You see here the sentence, Finland is pancakes, blueberries and fish. No one makes the same sentence with German food. Germany is That sentence doesn't exist. So sometimes it's also interesting to look at what doesn't exist, what isn't said, what isn't mentioned, not only to look at what is mentioned. And then another interesting fact that I found is scents are mentioned together with food, but both perceptions are stressed. Like you see in the example with cinnamon, so people mention the scent and then they say, but also the taste. Yeah, so they mention both. So fragrances, scents are also quite important for remembering because they immediately bring some memories back. So that might be the reason why they mention this as separate perceptions. And what I also found, this is why I gave you all the example, a lot of the examples from the mushrooms in the meadow, the connection of the origin of the food and the food itself is perceived to be more close in Finland than in the German-speaking countries. So people talk about picking mushrooms, they talk about how it feels to catch a fish, and that's always in connection with Finland. You know, in Germany you cannot do that. Maybe, you know, one of the reasons is if you want to go fishing at certain places, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Day fee might be 50 euros, you know, just to be able to go fishing. So people don't do that. Plus, you won't find those mushrooms, you know. There are 82 million people in Germany, and it's always going to be someone who has found that last mushroom, you know, before you. So some, you know, basic facts that have this consequence that in Germany maybe you don't feel this connection so close, and in Finland it's more, it's perceived as being more close. So yeah, those were some interesting differences, and now here, that's why I took Haribo sweets along, because this is the only brand that was mentioned, Haribo sweets. So as being German food items. Beer and schnapps, of course, special sausages, kale, Rinderrouladen, and then people were talking about German Christmas market, roasted almonds and mulled wine, and Persian and Turkish food. Austrian items were mentioned, of course, also by Austrians. Sweet dumplings, especially sweet dishes, sweet main dishes were mentioned. Kaiserschmarren, Apfelstrudel, the ones that I showed you, and also Christmas market. That's somehow the same, both in Germany and in Austria. Christmas market was mentioned. Christmas cookies and home-baked cookies. In Austria, where I have lived for 8 years, this is almost like a competition. You have to have different sorts of home-baked cookies at Christmas. So if you want to be a good housewife, you need to have at least 7 different sorts. Yeah, it's a lot of stress. Yeah, So yeah, but there are reasons why I moved to Finland. So yeah, maybe something that might shed some light on the fact why German food wasn't mentioned. Of course, I had this obligatory last question: is there still something else concerning these subjects that you would like to mention or add? And I had two men that mentioned, and I quoted one of them here. And for Finland, I would take up the arms, you know, to defend Finland. And I would defend Finland with arms, but with Germany, I'm not so sure about it, here someone says. So it means when I have to make really a choice, I would rather defend Finland than Germany. There are even statistics about it, because European countries, people have been asked if they are ready to defend their country with arms. And Finland has got the second highest number in Europe, I think after Georgia. Yeah. And Germany has, I think, is its second or third lowest number. They're only, the Dutch were still more reluctant to do it. So it's normal, yeah. Germans are not so eager to do it. So yeah, this might be interesting in this kind of connection. So when I look at my whole research, of course my probants, my interviews, they define identity in very different ways. And for the majority, I would say they have a hybrid identity. Yeah? They mention things like from the head, I think in a German way, but from the heart, yes, basically I think in a Finnish way. And then they define how they mean that. Of course, it's not obvious, you know, it's very, very personal, very unique. And they present their identity as being very unique. You can see that from their choice of words. They create new words on the spot. Like one person here mentioned a ritual and a holiday Finn. And I googled that Urlaubsfinne, and there was no hit for it. You know, once I will have finished my work, there's going to be one hit. But it didn't exist, that word. So it's a compound word that this person has created on the spot in that interview to show I'm someone special. You know, I'm a person who is Finnish, but only during his or her holiday. And for a lot of participants, the senses and especially food play an important part in defining identity. Well, that's not a surprise. You're sitting in this course because you also think that food is important, right? So, as most important for developing a Finnish identity and having a Finnish identity, well, it doesn't come really as a surprise. My interviewers mentioned the Finnish-speaking mother and regular visits to Finland. So I think it's, in a sort of way, it's evident, but now we come to some also surprises. Strong Finnish identity is not obligatorily linked to good language knowledge. So you don't need to speak Finnish to have a Finnish identity. That's interesting. And I have only persons with stronger German, a lot stronger German than Finnish, who claim that they don't have a home country. Ich habe keine Heimat in German. That sentence doesn't come from persons with a very strong Finnish identity. So one could ask some questions. For instance, I have interviewed this one lady. She has lost her Finnish because her mother, there was a divorce in the family, and she went on living with her father in Germany, and so from the age of 6 on, she hasn't spoken any Finnish. She has lost it completely, and she has never lived a day in Finland, but she says she has a Finnish identity. So could we call it as partly imagined or symbolic identity? We have these cases, you know. We have, for instance, sometimes it's always mentioned the Russians that came to Germany when, you know, they had this German grandmother and then they came to Germany, and they had a strong German identity. They thought of themselves as being Germans, and when they arrived in Germany, those bloody Germans said, "You're Russian." So it was kind of, that they thought of themselves as being German, and of course they had a German identity, but there is a difference between the self-perceived identity and what other people think about you. And in a few cases, people still mentioned Heimat as being linked to Nazi Germany. And biggest surprise was also some Swiss people. So people from Switzerland mentioned that. So even if your own country hasn't been involved in that bad history, it seems to be that the word is still influenced. So it has left its traces in the language. So, thank you very much for your attention, and here are some literature that I have used, but I can send you the link, and I can send you all the material that I have used, the two documents, so that you'll be able to have something from this lecture that you can keep and you can look at later on also. And maybe you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So please, if you have any questions.
Yes, I have some questions. Yes, I don't want to hijack it, but I find it very interesting. It's complicated, isn't it? Because there are so many variables that could influence the way people are presenting themselves with you, such as which language you're using to speak to them in. And the fact that they assume that as somebody who's half German and half Finnish, you would kind of know about German issues without having to be told about them. But of course that could possibly... Do you identify, if I may ask, do you identify primarily as German or Finnish, or do you have a hybrid identity yourself? And did you state that position to them?
Yeah, very good question. Indeed, I belong to that group myself, yes. So, all the persons I have interviewed knew right from the start that I belong to that group. So, we had a common ground, yeah. So of course I know if some American with no Finnish, no German background had interviewed those persons, they would have probably given totally different answers. Yeah, that's true. That's right. But I think you have to take that into account with each kind of research. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a specific food-related question as well, which is, I think you can leave aside those methodological questions which would, afflict any study. But I would hypothesize that possibly attitude to food is, I mean, it's highly emotionally coloured. Obviously, it is going to depend a lot on what national tradition their mother cooked in, particularly, and assuming the normative that the mother would do most of the cooking, which, given their generation, is probably right. I mean, obviously if you were asking people who were 20 or whatever, it would be a little different maybe. But aside from that though, I just also wonder whether their answers about food are related to the perceived prestige of that food, because if you look at Viennese food, Sachertorte is in the international haute cuisine repertoire. Swiss cheese and Swiss chocolate have got a very high status. So in other words, they're presenting themselves as sort of associated with something elite. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that they're raving snobs, but what I mean is that those have kind of got a national prestige significance. And it's more difficult, I would say, to think of German food, apart from the Christmas markets, which have now got a really huge international presence. Yep. They're certainly all over Britain. So it's a kind of transnational context maybe they're talking in.
Yeah, thank you for that input about the prestige. I think I should include that. That's a very interesting point. Even though has got pulla some prestige, why do they mention pulla, the Finnish, So, but you hit another really important point. 29 of my 31 have got a Finnish mother. Yes. So that might be one of the reasons why they mention more Finnish food items, because usually, You know, the mother is the one who cooks more. Plus, my interviewers, they were between, well, I said you have to be 18 to take part in this project to be interviewed, and the oldest one was 53 or 54 years old, because I wanted to exclude the ones who were born as war children, because they have a totally different story. You know that the German Wehrmacht used to be in Finland, and they had, you know, of course, because they have been here for quite a while, some Finnish ladies fell in love with the German Wehrmacht soldiers, and so there were a few children born. But after Finland and Germany had lost the war, it was a very bad thing to be such a child. So a lot of mothers wouldn't even tell their children that their father was German. So that's a totally different story. So I wanted to leave these people out, because that would have, you know, messed the whole thing. I wanted to have the second generation of immigrants, the Finnish, usually women, who went to the German-speaking countries to improve their German, yeah. Because German used to be the most important foreign language in Finland in the 60s and until the beginning of the 70s. So a lot of them had learned German in school. They wanted to improve their German. They went into the German-speaking countries because at the time Finland was a very poor country. A lot of people didn't see a future in Finland, like my mother. She said Finland was so poor, I thought there would be no future in Finland. That's why I went to Germany. So those women, they got married in the German-speaking countries, had children, and these are my interviewers. Mm-hmm. So that's the group. That's usually the group, yeah. So all of them belong to this group. In fact, their number is quite high. Alone in Germany, there are, it's estimated that there are about 30,000 persons with partly Finnish descendants. So it's, well, in comparison with Turkish people, it's nothing, but you know, it's still not a tiny little group. Yeah.
And also relative to the size of the Finnish populations.
That's a problem, because the German statistics, once you have the German nationality, you are German, and then everything else is lost, because German statistics don't register your mother tongue. Mm-hmm. So if you are German with a Finnish mother tongue, this Finnish mother tongue is lost on the way. Once you become a German, and then it used to be that way that until the year 2000, there was no option of having two nationalities. You had to decide either German or Finnish. So those Finnish women, many times, when they got married, they had the possibility to become German. And some of them chose that because they said, I want to have the same nationality as my husband has and as my children have. And the German nationality is much more valid. Well, remember, Finland wasn't an EU member country, you know? So it was much easier to travel with the German passport than with the Finnish passport. And for instance, my mother claimed that when they visited former Berlin, my father had to use a different entry to East Berlin than my mother. Yeah, because there were different places where you could cross the border for neutral countries and for Westerners. And so, well, there were some practical reasons why some of these Finnish women then simply gave up their Finnish nationality because they didn't have a choice, they couldn't keep it. And they became Germans, and only in the year 2000 they had the possibility again to regain their Finnish nationality. But lots of them didn't do that or missed it. So once you're German, in the statistics you won't, you disappear, you know. No one will find out where are your origins. So that's what makes it difficult when it comes to statistics, yes.
Any more questions? Well, at least you now have a lot of things to think about. So I hope this will reflect in the lecture diaries that you are going to submit. And then I think we will adjourn for today, and we are looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow in the main building.